Hi, everybody. This is Matthew Klam, and I'm going to be speaking with Jake Tapper. Hi, Jake. How you doing?
Hey, Matt.
Jake, are you here in DC?
I'm not. Right now, I'm in Virginia at a lake.
Very nice.
So
that's great.
Connection is spot. I apologize, but it's one of the many examples of the infrastructure in this country that is sorely lacking.
So do you think you're going to be freezing up and you're going to want me to just, I'll just wait for you if you disappear for a while?
That might happen. But but right now I'm Zooming on my phone. So hopefully that will work better than because we're in something of an internet desert here. I will say that, like, I don't know. I mean, so much of the country, I'm sorry to get all wonky and reporter like, but so much of the country has this problem. They don't have good internet. And it's incredible to me that this situation continues in all over the place, all over America. Because, I mean, I don't know how people, especially all those poor school kids that had to do school remotely this year. Anyway.
Yeah.
By the way, by my window right now, I see a little bunny rabbit, just so you know.
Jake, I'm gonna now begin my formal duties as the moderator here. You are known to many people around the world as the host of a news show on CNN 5 days a week, and a show. And by the way, anytime you can refute any of this if you don't agree with it, please.
Okay.
And a show on Sunday morning.
No, I like to fact check.
Okay, and you're the lead anchor. Anytime on CNN there is some sort of national or international event that CNN covers. And in the past 15 years, in your spare time, you've written 5 books, all quite successful, all very different. Body Slam, about Jesse Ventura. Down and Dirty, about the 2000 presidential election. The Outpost, about a battle in Afghanistan, where you had to actually travel to Afghanistan during the war to do reporting, which was then made into an excellent movie. And now 2 novels, which we'll get to in a moment. So far, so good?
No, I would not say. Body Slam came out in '98, so that's technically not the last 15 years. Same thing with Down and Dirty. I also would not say that either of those books were successful. Just to be completely fair.
Okay, I appreciate your candor. You also, I'm just going to go ahead here and say, you also seem to say yes to a lot of things outside of work. Interviewing authors at the 92nd Street Y, supporting local bookstores by moderating events. You also have a reputation as someone who says yes when asked to do things for a good cause. You seemingly single-handedly raised a huge amount of money for Homes for Our Troops, and you work on behalf of veterans. So far, so good?
Yeah, but no, it's not single-handedly. I do this auction every year for Homes for Our Troops, and it's not single-handedly because you are one of the many people who contribute items.
That's true. I want to just say that I use the word seemingly because I wanted to say that you do, in a way, you lead the charge, and you really it's something that's driven out of your ambition to do a wonderful thing for women.
I list a lot of generous people who then contribute their wares, such as you.
Yes.
Individuals range like from you to Jennifer Aniston and everything in between.
That's right. What did Jennifer Aniston do for the fundraiser? I forget.
She donated a very expensive purse.
Oh. Yeah, I would have bid on that if I had known.
Well, I don't think you would have bid on it, but anyway, it was there to bid on.
You also made I'm going to get to the books in a second. You also made a 5-minute video for 826 DC, an organization that gives free academic assistance to kids age 5 to 18 here in the district. And it helped raise more money in a single event than they ever had. You somehow make time to do all these things, and you're married, and you have 2 children, and you're very involved in your family life. Your older daughter wrote a book recently. You've been known to cook for dinner guests, and I'm not sure that everything on the internet is true, but I read that you invented the vaccine for COVID.
Oh, of everything you said, I don't cook dinner guests. I guess I grill. I guess I do grill. You've been over and I've done some grilling. Is that cooking? Is grilling cooking?
Yeah, it sure is.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And I know that you're working to fix climate change in your spare time. You can elaborate on that if you want. But I don't really want to get into how you somehow get all these things done because it makes me feel lazy. But maybe you should just go ahead and tell us anyway.
Well, I mean, because not everything you just said is true. So I don't know. I don't supposed to explain it. I did not create the COVID vaccine. You know,
All right.
I think that you know that.
But I guess what I'm wondering is, well, we're going to get to this. I do have a sort of section here in my questions. Let's just start talking about your novels here. So your new novel, The Devil May Dance, received a starred review in PW, Publishers Weekly. It received a rave in the New York Times, tons of other great reviews, spent 3 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. And the characters that appear in The Devil May Dance appeared in the Hellfire Club, your first novel, which came out in 2018. And feel free to add to this or correct me, but I just want to say that the Hellfire Club was about a first-term congressman, Charlie Margaret, World War II combat vet, and his wife, Margaret, who are a bit naive and idealistic, coming to DC politics, hoping to do good, and realizing that the world is not a nice place for idealists. Does that sound accurate?
It does. It does sound accurate. We should. I mean, I also feel like we should disclose that you and I are very good friends, and that you read both books in draft form and made amazing, excellent suggestions and edits. I mean, I think we should disclose that, right? I don't want to get any angry letters.
I gave you a few thoughts on the manuscript, and was honored to. So, but I guess, okay, so now I'm going to pick your brain a little bit. And I guess the larger question is writing, I mean, you've been making stuff since you were a kid. You were a cartoonist. You like to draw. You like to make things. I hope I'm not revealing too much about our friendship to say that at any given moment, lying on a beach or sitting around a pool, you might make up a song that entertains you. You're a creative person. And I wonder, is writing therapeutic for you? And so I'm just wondering, thinking about, before we get to The Devil May Dance, in the Hellfire Club, like writing about the fact that people enter DC, the world of journalism, the world of national politics, and they're idealists at first, and then they learn that the demands placed on an idealistic person sort of forces them to compromise in ways so that they can function in that milieu. Like, was that therapeutic for you to write about? And did you identify with that? Do you feel that there was an idealistic part of you that got stepped on a little bit as you made your way in the covering national politics?
Oh, that's an interesting question. It's less about journalism is one of those fields where you actually can remain fairly idealistic. Obviously, there are compromises that happen with any field, period, like medicine, anything, mainly in terms of just getting along with people, especially getting along with assholes. But those are the compromises of life. I mean, in order to function in a neighborhood, even though your next door neighbor is an asshole, you have to figure out how to get along, right? So I'm not talking about my next door neighbor is lovely, but yes.
Yeah.
But beyond that, journalism is a field where you don't really have to make too many compromises, I feel like. I mean, I guess it's probably different if you work at, some of the crazier channels out there, but I'm pretty lucky. And like, look at your career. You're an amazing fiction writer.
Thank you very much.
And there was a period where a decade where you focused on nonfiction. And a lot of that, I assume, was to pay the bills. But then, was that a compromise for you to be doing nonfiction instead of fiction? Probably not, because you were writing nonfiction about things that were interesting, and they still were writing challenges, and they still allowed you to come up with amazing turns of phrase, like when you described Josh Marshall as having looked as though a wrinkle bomb had gone off. That's a great line of yours that you made up. That was in 2004. It's still in my head, right? 2004. So, but the larger issue you're talking about seeing people come to Washington, D.C. very idealistically. I think like they come into any field Hollywood, writing, journalism, whatever. People come to Washington, D.C., especially politicians, very idealistic. And then you see them quite often be forced to make compromises, and often the compromises are just keeping their mouth shut when it comes to criticizing somebody in their own party. That's a big force. Democrats pressured not to say anything about, people in their caucus who make them mad, whether it's progressives about moderates or moderates about progressives. Same thing in the Republican Party when it comes to really Trump and Trumpism. But then there are other bigger compromises. So, and that was just something I've seen a lot. And so I decided to write about in the Hellfire Club. In terms of whether or not it was therapeutic, I mean, I think it's therapeutic. Yeah. I mean, we had a panel yesterday when we were talking about, Susan Glasser was on the panel from the New Yorker, and she just had this big scoop about how crazy things were in the last days of the Trump administration, and Trump and Pompeo and others wanting to bomb Iran. And General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, pushing back on that. And we should note, Bill Milley's not exactly a dove. He was pushing the targeted killing of General Soleimani, the Iranian terrorist leader. But anyway, just how insane everything was, and how crazy it was, and how close we actually got to American democracy literally being overturned. And what would have happened if, instead of General Mark Milley in that role, we had a less hinged general like Mike Flynn or whatever. And after that panel discussion, I turned to the panel. I said, now you know why I write fiction, because because the nonfiction is so upsetting. It's so distressing, so yes. So I do think it's therapeutic.
That's great. Okay, so yeah, and so in the Hellfire Club, Charlie learns the hard way to deal with people like Joe McCarthy, which I thought was a great addition to the storyline, and to compromise in order to get things done. Although, and I think this is where things really get fun for you, there are also nefarious forces that are out there literally trying to kill Charlie and Margaret. And the book opens, if I'm not mistaken, with Charlie face down in the mud after a supposed, or what he assumes is a drinking binge, stumbling away from a car wreck. The book is a lot of fun.
Yeah, that takes place in Rock Creek Park, and I've thought about that. The scene occurred to me because I drive on Rock Creek Park all the time, and you know how incredibly dangerous it is, Rock Creek. Actually, when I was at Washington City paper, I wrote an entire cover story about how deadly Rock Creek Park is. It's really, at the time, it was one of the deadliest roads in the DC area, and I think the deadliest mile for mile. And it's just there's a creek right there, right next to the road, and people are zooming along at 70 miles an hour. And so that came to me just from being a commuter and just seeing God, it'd be so easy. Especially during a storm, can you imagine the car just veering off? And anyway, yeah, that's how it opens.
So I think in a very basic way, that is therapeutic. You have an anxiety, this road I drive on is dangerous. And then you sort of give it voice the way you might in a psychologist's office. And that's good. I mean, I've ridden my bike on that road. That road is a terrifying road if you're a cyclist, and bike riders and joggers are on that road. Anyway, be warned, people.
Not only DC. That, once a day or twice a day, they change the direction. They only allow people to be going one direction on Rock Creek. So police, yeah. So the 4 local police, it might be park police from the National Park Service, have to come out, stop all traffic going in one direction, and have all the traffic go in one, towards the city in the morning, away from the city at night. And that's really dangerous for the police. So yeah, it's, anyway.
As you know, I have a daughter who is now learning to drive, and we've been on some of the traffic circles around here. And I've had to first say to her, we're approaching a traffic circle. You've been on them your whole life, but now you're going to be driving in one. And I don't really know what to tell you, except somebody thought this is a good idea. Yeah. Anyway, crazy.
Was it L'Enfant? Was it Monsieur l'Enfant. Who came up with traffic circles? They're a horrible idea. They're the worst. Like, I don't even understand. Didn't they realize after the first one, like, this is a bad idea? Let's not build any more of these. By the way, I come from Philadelphia. There are not a ton of traffic circles in Philadelphia. I can think of one, Logan Circle. That's it. I can think of one. I'm sure there are others, but that's really the only one I can think of. DC, it's like every 4 blocks. What the?
Well, it's funny that you say that about Philly, because you and I both went to college in New Hampshire. You went to the much better college in New Hampshire, but the first time I ever drove on a traffic circle was in New Hampshire, and I thought these people were insane. Luckily, a lot of the time I was hungover in college, I didn't really.
Have you ever driven on those highways in New Hampshire? Have no lights. There are no lights on interstates. So have you ever driven on like 91 at like midnight, especially like during a snowfall or something? And you're like, how is that States? This is like Siberia. There's no lights.
I'm sure I have. I remember going out on the highway to go to the state liquor stores in New Hampshire. That was always a very festive journey. But yeah, no, I mean, I've been up there. I was just up there last summer, and was I on 91? Yeah, for a short time. I mean, yeah, it's really, I love New Hampshire. I don't know, we're off in the weeds here now talking about New Hampshire, but I do love New Hampshire, and it has its certain very specific charms there. Not a mask in sight last summer when I was up there. Okay, so let me just get back to The Devil May Dance, and just ask you, when you're working on the Hellfire Club, did you have a moment where you're like, I might have enough interest in this character to write a second book about him? I mean, that is sort of fascinating to me.
That didn't happen until people started buying the Hellfire Club. And it was only after, like, writing a novel was always an ambition. I wrote a novel in my 20s that was unpublished. But through that novel, I got an agent, and then that's how other books happened. So it wasn't a complete waste. And I don't even know where that book is. I think I wrote it on a floppy disk. I have no idea where it is. So even if I found the floppy disk, I wouldn't know what to do with it.
I have a Zenith laptop in my basement. We can boot it up.
I mean, I would just anyway. So once I achieved the Hellfire Club and it was published, and so that was like, okay, I've written a novel and hopefully people will like it, and people bought it. It was on the bestseller list for a few weeks. So then I was like, oh, I could probably write another one. I really like the characters, Charlie Margaret. Charlie, as you note, World War II veteran, a Republican congressman from New York City, which is not crazy because this is the 1950s and 1960s when there were Republican congressmen from New York City. And he's like an Eisenhower Republican. And Margaret, his stronger, morally center zoologist wife. And I liked them. I liked the characters. And then around that time, I remember reading about this true story about how Sinatra, after helping John F. Kennedy get elected president in 1960, expected that President Kennedy, would stay with him on a California swing.
Can you, for people who aren't as tuned into history as you, can you just explain what you mean by Sinatra helped Kennedy get elected in 1960 in that narrow election?
Sure. So Sinatra was, Frank Sinatra was one of the biggest stars in the world at the time, not just an amazing singer, but he also had won an Academy Award as an actor, had a thriving cinematic career, and he hung out with a bunch of other actors, singers, and they were called the Rat Pack. So it was Sammy Davis Jr. and Peter Lawford and Dean Martin and a whole bunch of others. And they were, it's the best way to explain it for people who don't really have a grasp on what that was, is they all went on to make this in, I think, 61 or 62 or 63, somewhere in there, they made a horrible movie called Ocean's 11. Really bad, not good at all. I don't recommend it at all, but it is. And it was basically just so they could go to Las Vegas and screw around and make a movie and make a lot of money while just hanging around and drinking and hitting on women. And but they remade the movie Ocean's 11, I don't know, like 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Steve Soderbergh brilliant film director, with another like all-star cast: George Clooney, Brad Pitt, Matt Damon, Don Cheadle, etc. And the best way to explain the Rat Pack is, imagine if all those guys, George Clooney, Brad Pitt, etc., who are still superstars, but are, now I think George is 60. I mean, like, they're a little older now, but I'm talking about when they're in their 40s or 30s. Imagine if they also could sing and also hung out all the time. And that's how big the actual Rat Pack was. So they helped get Kennedy elected. It was a very close election between Vice President Nixon and Senator Kennedy. There wasn't a huge amount of policy differences between the two. At the time, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party were both pretty moderate. In fact, Jackie Robinson, the civil rights icon, endorsed Nixon in the 1960 election because it wasn't clear which party was going to embrace civil rights ultimately. That wasn't clear until 64, when Lyndon Johnson pushed the Civil Rights Act. Anyway, and there were other ways that Sinatra helped get Kennedy elected that I go into in the book. And so it's not so crazy that he expected that Kennedy would stay with him. Kennedy had stayed with him in his Rancho Mirage estate when he was running for president in 1960. And, that was, so this is the true story. And at the time, Attorney General Robert Kennedy was investigating organized crime. And somebody pointed out to him, that's great that we're going after organized crime. Your brother's friend, Frank Sinatra, has a lot of friends who are mobsters, who are people that you are actually investigating. And so it became a conundrum for Attorney General Robert Kennedy. Do I let my brother stay with this guy in this estate where mobsters have definitely slept? Or do I offend one of the biggest stars in the world who helped get my brother elected, who, by the way, was building up his Rancho Mirage? That's right. It's about 2 hours outside LA in Palm Springs. He's building up his estate. He's installing phone lines, having rooms built. He had a helipad built. And so that was the true story of Attorney General Robert Kennedy's dilemma. And what I did was just take that real story and just have Kennedy send Charlie and Margaret out to LA to figure out just how mobbed up is Sinatra really.
So right before that, yeah. So you, in this really great way of fictionalizing, based on fact, you have the U.S. Attorney General, Bobby Kennedy, who's like in this tough place. He's like, I have to figure out whether the mob is Sinatra is enough in bed with the mob that I. I have to see if I should prevent my brother, the president, from going out there. And so you make this problem personal for Charlie, because as the book opens, Charlie's, he's got a big problem, which is that his dad is in jail. And somehow you connect those two things in a way that I thought was really cool. There's a lot of sort of jeopardy there for your main character, and there's this big ticking clock.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the great lessons I've had in learning how to write fiction is that it's not Frank walked into or Matt walked into a room and everyone said hi and somebody gave him a glass of milk. That's not writing. Writing is Matt walked into a room and people were mad to see, Matt walked into a room, but people in the room were not happy to see him. Therefore, they started throwing apples at him, right? It's not and it's but therefore, so there's always, there just always has to be conflict. And in fact, one of the lessons I got, I'm a big believer in showing people my drafts just to make the book as good as possible. You, of course, are the number one editor reader that I rely upon, but I show it to other people too, because not everybody picks up the same stuff. And my brother, who is a religious studies professor in California, not a fiction writer, but he has a very keen eye, and he pointed out to me that I have Charlie goes out to befriend Frank Sinatra, and Sinatra welcomes him with open arms. And like that doesn't work. He didn't buy it. It's also not good writing. So it's Charlie and Margaret go out to befriend Sinatra, but Sinatra doesn't like them. Therefore, Charlie has to figure out a way to get in his good graces. So, I mean, that's part of the process that I've learned from people like you and others.
That's great. I didn't realize your brother, the religious studies professor, had that insight. That's but you know, the other thing I notice for writers who are listening, you don't have to be a writer to have great insights about writing. I think if you have intelligent friends who you trust as readers, you know, they I think have insights that are just as valuable as other writers. And it sounds like Aaron, who we know is a very intelligent person, did that for you. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, we all consume entertainment, right? We all read books, we all watch TV, we all watch movies. So we all think that we're experts on all of this stuff, right? But
yeah.
But in a way you can be. I mean, Aaron, my brother, is, you know, he's brilliant about a lot of things, but he's not a fiction writer, but he's a fiction consumer. And to him, it was just like, I don't buy this. I don't buy that Sinatra would just accept Charlie into the Rat Pack. And I'm like, God damn it, you're right, this little punk. You know, but I fixed it. I figured out a way to have a conflict that Sinatra's in, and Charlie saves Sinatra from in that conflict, and thus gets in his good graces. So, I mean, it really, it was a really good insight. I mean, one of the things about writing is just figuring out how to make all this work. It's like the only math I ever liked in my life was geometry, because it was just it was just logic. It wasn't even math to me. I mean, I forget it all now, sine, cosine, I don't even know what that means, but I enjoyed the logic of it. And so writing, I shouldn't say it's completely therapeutic, because it's also incredibly frustrating, right? You write yourself into a corner, or you think it sucks, or, you know, I've started now the third novel like 3 times, and like I'm trying to figure out how to do it, and then I wake up the next morning and I read it, I'm like, what, this is awful. But so I guess but solving the problems can be fun.
Well, speaking of fun, the New York Times book review said the seriousness of this book never gets in the way of the breathless fun. And I want to say about The Devil May Dance that it is a ton of fun. And plenty of times while I was reading it, I kind of wanted to pour a double martini and lie in a pool chaise and float around. And it's funny that that book has that effect on me, because you're a person who does like to, you know how to relax, but you don't spend a whole lot of time doing it. But somehow you wrote a book that made me feel like I just wanted to consume a lot of martinis and float around in a pool on a sunny day. So I mean, it's just one of the great effects of the book. There are also, I should say, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, you should. I need, when we're done here, I need to show you the mock-ups for the paperback cover of The Devil, because it's the hardback is the Hollywood sign, the back view of the Hollywood sign looking in Los Angeles, and it's really cool. And there's a scene in the book that takes place at the Hollywood sign. But the paperback, the paperback, I'll send you after this, I'll text it to you, is a pool scene. It's a man lying on the pool and a woman in a pool, which I thought was fun. So the idea that it made you kind of feel like you wanted to be in that experience. One of the fun things about writing or reading, I guess, like I think about your great book, Who is Rich? And for people who haven't read Matt's book, Who is Rich, you really should. It's a masterpiece. Lots of great reviews. And then of course his book of short stories, Sam the Cat, is just amazing. And I was a fan of Matt's before I became a friend of Matt's. And so many great short stories in that. Issues I dealt with in therapy might be my favorite. But in any case, the memories I have of reading both the book Who is Rich and also the screenplay, because you're working on a screenplay to make Who is Rich into a film, which reminds me, by the way, you should send me the most recent copy, because there's somebody I want to send it to. But beyond that, like, I have memories of Rich at this literary festival in this fictitious, Hamptons-esque town. I have memories of it, even though, of course, it didn't happen. And more vividly for me, because I wrote it, I have memories of hanging out with the Rat Pack at Puccini at the restaurant, or hanging out with the Rat Pack at the pool at the Sands Hotel, which I've never seen, but just imagine in my brain. I mean, that's one of the fun things about not just reading, but also writing, is like you spend so much time with these characters and in these scenes that they become almost like memories.
Yeah, that's true. And I'm going to get to you as a researcher in a moment, but yeah, it is funny. Last night or yesterday, I was just reading about Toots Shor's like saloon. I don't know when it stopped existing, but it's just one of the many. I mean,
were you reading the New Yorker story?
No, there's a New Yorker story about Toots Shor's.
Yeah, from like the 50s. That's where I got some of the details for the scene book. Yeah,
cool. No, I was just like, I was looking at your book again and just looking at and thinking about some of these. I mean, and I'll get to this in a second. There are serious issues in the book, and some of those dovetail with your own advocacy and the causes you do work for. But in the Devil May Dance, which covers end of 61 to middle of 1962, there's just, I mean, there are a ton of great places. There are a lot of sort of fascinating views into historical events. I mean, this is just a couple of things I was thinking of yesterday. Whether Fatty Arbuckle deserved to be canceled is like something you mention in the early pages. The ways that Sammy Davis Jr. endured racism in the military, the way young girls are flung at powerful men, and the ways women generally have been used as mannequins and sex dolls by pretty much everyone in this book except Charlie. I thought all of those things, it was great that you were able to get all those things into the story.
And I assume that that's what Janet Maslin was talking about when she said the seriousness of the book doesn't get in the way of the fun, which is there are, I mean, there is a lot of facts about Hollywood and also fiction about Hollywood that I write about in terms of the racism that Sammy Davis Jr. had to deal with. And yeah, I mean, like it's not subtext, it's text of the book is about women in Hollywood. And I think one of the things that I got from that I think a lot of people who read the book got, and I was gratified to read in reviews, were like the idea that really when you read about the way women were treated in Hollywood in the early 60s, I can't see a huge amount of progress today, 2021. I mean, like, yeah, I guess Weinstein's in prison, but and when you have, there are entertainment success stories, women who like Shonda Rhimes, who are legitimately powerful and their voices are heard, Mindy Kaling, Elizabeth Banks, and others. But generally speaking, it's still a world catered to old white men, and it is still a place where old white men take advantage of the young women and others who come to Hollywood to have their dreams fulfilled. And so I don't think the book is a bummer. It's not I don't think it's a depressing book. It's hopefully a fun book, but that is a reality that I wrote about.
Well, it's funny because it does reflect your personality in that you're a person who likes to have fun, you like to kid around, and you also have a side that is unrelentingly interested in trying to set the record straight, which I think is what makes you a great journalist, and I think it's what makes you an interesting person, and it's why people who you interview sometimes don't like you, because you insist on, I forget who it was who sort of famously said like people like, the people who you interviewed didn't like you. It was some line that came out in like a WikiLeaks or something like that.
It was John, Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman. There was a WikiLeaks of him in 2015 writing to the communications communications team of the Hillary Clinton campaign, why is Jake Tapper such a dick? Can I tell you what I was doing that prompted this? Hillary Clinton had, and this is the early days of Black Lives Matter, or not the early days of Black Lives Matter, but the early days of like white people becoming aware of Black Lives Matter. And she was asked about Black Lives Matter in I think in Missouri, maybe even Ferguson or the area. And she said what a lot of politicians said, Democrats and Republicans, because they didn't know, they didn't understand. And they were like, well, all lives matter. All lives matter. She was trying to say that in a supportive way.
Right.
But she didn't understand at the time that all lives matter was actually contrary to the whole, that Black Lives Matter, forget the people who run Black Lives Matter who just put out a statement that was basically supportive of the Cuban government. Forget that. I'm just talking about the movement itself.
Yes.
The idea is like, hey, Black Lives Matter too. That's right. What it means. Black lives also matter. Don't forget we matter too. And so there's a big misunderstanding about that. And I think we just covered it. We just talked about it. I don't remember being personally critical of her, but I just remembered noting this disconnect. And I believe that's what prompted why is Jake Tapper such a dick. So when the WikiLeaks came out, though, I tweeted it out and I said, it's a question that has confused people for centuries. We still don't have an answer. But I think you would have said one of my best friends that I'm actually a nice guy.
You're a great guy, and you're a softie. Yeah, you are. I'm glad we covered that on this interview after being friends for 20-something years.
Did we get an answer to the question? I don't think we did, but we will continue.
What was I just going to say? I've totally forgotten what my train of thought. I was going to say, you just mentioned Twitter. If people do have questions, the system isn't set up here to pull them in, but if you tweet them at Jake, or if you tweet them at me, it's Matt Klam.
Matthew Klam with a K.
Handle, yeah.
And Beth,
it's at Matthew Klam.
Tweeted something.
Yeah.
At Matthew Klam or at Jake Tapper. I will even open my because normally I only read certain tweets because otherwise it's just a cesspool. But I'll open it up to all users now. But
actually, it might be easier for me to screen than you. Yeah, go ahead.
Beth Ann Patrick just said something, and I want to say hi, Beth Ann. How are you out there? She's the reason that we're here, both of us.
Right.
So, and thank you to her. Thank you to her for her support of books and writing and all that. And here's something from Sean Murphy. He writes here that he appreciates the acknowledgement. The writing is hard and never gets easier, but still the most gratifying work to do. This is okay. So hi, Sean, and hi, Beth Ann. And I mean, I think one of the things that's funny, like, and Matt, you're such a master at fiction, and I'm always after you to write more and to like demand less of yourself, just because like I figure like the stuff you throw away is better than most of the stuff published by other authors, including myself. But it's tough. And nobody should think that it's easy. I mean, it's very difficult writing fiction. I don't think it's easy for now I am privileged enough to know a bunch of these fiction writers in addition to you, people like David Baldacci and Harlan Coben and James Patterson and others. And like, I don't know one person who thinks it's fun and easy. It's gratifying, but it's a challenge.
What's annoying is that there are writers whose first draft is good. There aren't many, but a lot of other writers then see that and they think that their first draft is good, when the norm is that everybody's first draft and like 15th draft is terrible. And I'm going to be telling that to a student today. Let me just, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to, and I think you and I should both answer them because you're actually the more acclaimed, accomplished writer of the two of us. What was the most valuable lesson you learned about writing between writing the Hellfire Club and The Devil May Dance? So I'll give my answer for that, and then you should give your answer for when you're done, whatever it is you're doing right there.
I'm just looking at my phone. Yeah.
Whatever the biggest lesson you've gotten between Sam the Cat and Who is Rich. My biggest lesson was cut. Like if I could go back, I would go into the Hellfire Club with a scythe, like the Grim Reaper, and just start mowing down stuff. And in fact, there was an entire chapter in the Hellfire Club that I killed on my own without even anybody giving me feedback. I was just like, I found out that Eisenhower, who's a character in the first book, the Hellfire Club, also had a place in Palm Springs. And I was like, oh my God, that's so exciting. And so I had Charlie reunite with his hero, General Eisenhower, President Eisenhower. And I wrote this whole chapter, and it went into detail about where they lived and what the house looked like. And, it was all based on research. And then I read it, later, and I was like, there's literally one thing that happens in this chapter that is important for the plot, and I can just put it on the previous chapter. It's just like Charlie gets a phone call, his dad's sick. He needs to get back east. None of it.
Yeah.
The whole chapter was just a waste, and I threw it out. So biggest lesson. What's the biggest lesson you learned between your book of short stories and Who is Rich, your novel?
Well, there's two things. That's sort of really a basic thing is that, and I just find this with, I'm working on a piece of nonfiction now for the New York Times Magazine, and I'm working on a piece of fiction now, and they're both just an opportunity to think. They're a good place to clarify the things I think, and they're a sort of safe space for thinking. So there's that part. But on a technical level, it took me a long time to figure out that if I came up with something like just what you were talking about, a piece of information that I realized I discovered on page 230, and that if I just took that piece of information and put it on page 15, it would change the book. When I first realized that was happening, I was scared because I thought this shouldn't be happening. I shouldn't be discovering things late in the book. And then I realized that happens to writers all the time. Joan Didion talked about that in her Paris Review interview, that you discover stuff as you're working, and then you realize, oh, if I had only known this on page 1, well, you can move it to page 1. And then once you do,
right,
it makes you as the writer look a lot smarter.
Yes. And you're allowed to. It's funny because there's almost like this, you almost get married to the first draft or the first, and it's Baldacci told me that in his latest book, A Gambling Man, which I have not read, but I do love the Archer series. I read the first one, One Good Deed. He told me that there was like this whole thing that he came up with, this whole twist at the end of the book. And one of his friends, and this goes into, again, like getting feedback from friends before you send it to the editor, the publisher, one of his friends, or maybe it was his agent or whatever. Someone was like, you don't need this. You don't need this. This distracts. And Baldacci was like, I wrote the entire book around this. The entire book is written about that, like to lead up to this twist. And maybe it was actually his editor even was like, you don't need it. You do not need it. It makes it worse. And ultimately, he gave up on it. So that's funny. Yeah, it's weird. You feel, the truth of the matter is I now wish I could go back and do the Hellfire Club and do a third draft of it or another draft of it, make Joe McCarthy an even bigger character, cut out some of the, and when we're trying to make it into a streaming TV series, and I say to Mark Smith, who's the writer, this brilliant guy, he wrote The Revenant and he's doing all these movies right now. And I say to him, this is not, these aren't the two tablets brought down from Mount Sinai. This is just a book. Like if you want to make Joe McCarthy a much bigger character, do it. Like, because that's what I would do if I could go back and rewrite the Hellfire Club. I would have less Kefauver and more Joe McCarthy. So anyway, yeah, it's funny how we get married to that.
Yeah, and we lean on it, and we think it's the reason why we're there, and it's hard. We become sort of dense and resistant to what we're actually there to discover, which is what happens in the writing. But it's funny too that you are hung up. You keep bringing up Joe McCarthy because you wrote about Now I'm departing from talking about The Devil May Dance, but you wrote about A Face in the Crowd. You wrote about this magnificent film that came out. It was Andy Griffith's sort of first big role, and it made him a superstar. And you wrote this brilliant piece in The Atlantic about it. And I can't help but think you're also trying to figure out ways to address the idea of a demagogue.
Yeah.
Because we just lived with one in the White House, and you bringing up Joe McCarthy, I think even since you wrote the Hellfire Club, our curiosity about and our need to discuss the idea of a demagogue, I think is more urgent than ever.
It's so funny, and this is just another example of how you and I are close. And so I watched A Face in the Crowd, and I told you have you ever seen this movie? It's so great. It's basically the story about how demagogues can exploit the United States. And you're like, yeah, I told you to watch this movie a year ago. Don't you remember? And I'm like, oh, right. That's why I watched it. That's why I watched it. Because you told me to, but then it just became part of my brain because you and I are such good friends. So yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that was interesting about it when I was researching it, this I wrote for The Atlantic, I think it came out in October of last year, was Bud Schulberg, who wrote the screenplay and the book on which the screenplay is based, or I guess it's kind of a novella, went to Dartmouth, where I went, and his papers are at the Dartmouth Library. So while I was writing this, and the Dartmouth Library was nice enough to send me digitized copies of the stuff, and mainly it's letters between him and Elia Kazan, the director. Both of these guys, by the way, are bad guys in Hollywood because they both named names during the McCarthy hearings and all that. But putting that aside for 1 second, I mean, there's a reason for that we can go into about how disillusioned they were with communism, and what they thought communism was going to be this great thing, and then they realized it was actually awful and whatever. Anyway, but it was just so fun reading these letters between Kazan and Schulberg. Anyway, but you were the one that gave me the idea. So again.
Okay, I'm going to get back to The Devil May Dance for a moment and say, there is this this thing that's set in motion in the beginning of the book, which is based on reality, but it also ties in Charlie Marder. So he has this problem, which is that he's been sort of conscripted by the Attorney General to go out and infiltrate the Rat Pack and figure out how mobbed up Sinatra is. But also, by a page 15, it's clear that Charlie has this other, more personal problem, which is that he can't stop drinking. I mean, his dad is in jail. I'm not sure if that's I mentioned that already, but he's desperate to get his father out of jail. It's connected to Bobby Kennedy, and suddenly he's being forced to cooperate with the Attorney General and infiltrate a group that is the biggest boozers on the planet. And he's got to go out there, and he's got to ingratiate himself with them. And it's really a kind of a funny conflict that you give him, because it's like, if you're going to go out and hang out with the Rat Pack, you got to party. On the other hand, he's just trying to keep it together. So by page 15, he's shaky as hell in with his alcohol, and yet you throw him into that mix, which I thought was a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, and this also came out when we were talking about, and I forget who gave the idea, but it might have been Mark Smith. But the idea, when we were talking about the Hellfire Club and turning it into a series, a streaming series, and it was suggested. There's a lot of drinking in the Hellfire Club, which takes place in 1954, because there was a lot of drinking back then. Somebody suggested, I forget who it was exactly, that if Charlie had PTSD and he drank, then some of the bad decisions he makes might make more sense. And he certainly drinks a lot in the first book, but I didn't give him post-traumatic stress, although it's alluded to, but not as directly as in the next book. I mean, it definitely talks about his difficulties with the war, and he's definitely has flashbacks and the like. but I cover veterans a lot in my journalistic life, and with the writing of the book The Outpost, and I know PTSD is a real thing. It's obvious, and it's obviously not just veterans, people who have trauma, whether it's personal trauma or car accident or whatever. PTSD exists in all sorts of facets of life, but it just made
also
sense.
Trauma doesn't necessarily show up
Right.
Sometimes it shows up decades later. I mean, that's really common, right, especially for
So it just made sense to have Charlie have PTSD because he went through these horrible experiences in the war, and then also the idea that he would be, look, people, I mean, the term post-traumatic stress didn't even exist. I mean, there wasn't even a discipline. It was called like shell shock back in the 50s and 60s. Nobody took it as seriously as they do today. And what would a guy like Charlie do in the 50s and 60s? Well, he would self-medicate, but he's not self-medicating with pills. He would just be drinking bourbon. And so it made sense. And as you know, if you are dealing with alcoholism and you're aware of it and you're trying to hide it from your wife, but you realize that you really need to stop, the very last group of people you would want to be hanging out with is the Rat Pack, who were like proud alcoholics. Like it was like Dean Martin's entire routine was that he was an alcoholic. That was his whole shtick. Like, right. His show, he had a cigarette and a drink. I think it was scotch, right. But so.
Yeah. I saw a clip. I just randomly went on YouTube this week to look at a little bit of Rat Pack stuff. And there is a moment where he finishes singing a song in, I think it's the Dean Martin show, and he almost falls off his stool because he's got the drink in one hand and the cigarette in the other. He doesn't have a free hand.
Yeah, there wasn't apple juice. That was really bourbon and scotch. I mean, they were really drinking, and they really were. I mean, they were really loaded. They really were. I mean, it's nuts. It's absolutely nuts.
So
it's another question.
Yeah,
another question.
Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna this one because I wonder. I wonder what this is. What's a genre that you'd like to try but you're scared to try? You can go first.
I keep. I'm totally fascinated by the stuff that I first read when I was a kid, which was like espionage and counter-espionage and stuff like that. And even though I don't know much about it, whenever I hear stuff in DC and about the fact that DC has the highest concentration of spies on the planet. I mean, just this morning I was reading about how in Vienna, all these American State Department employees have Havana syndrome. From being zapped probably with some kind of microwave, and it's like damaging their brains.
You're talking about Vienna, Virginia, right? We're talking about Vienna, Austria.
I thought. Which Vienna? No, I think it's in Austria. It's in the Times today. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm just saying, talking about State Department employees who live in Virginia. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no. So anyway, I'm interested in double lives, and I'm interested in people who, are living, have two different stories about themselves. And I think these people who work in espionage have some of that stuff. And so that's a genre that I probably never have the nerve to try, but I'm intrigued about.
Oh,
what about you?
So good. Oh, it'd be so. Oh my God! Now I want to read this. Please write that. Please write it. It would be so good.
Okay.
I don't know if there's a genre. I mean, I don't think I am skilled enough as a writer to write like the kind of the kind of literary fiction that you write. But I will say something that I think about all the time is there's a character in both books, Isaiah Street. He's a black congressman from Chicago. He was a Tuskegee Airman. He's Charlie's best friend. He's one of the heroes in the Hellfire Club, and he has a smaller role in The Devil May Dance, just because it would make not a lot of sense to have him out there with them for the whole trip. But I would love to do a book about Isaiah Street having some sort of mystery, some sort of situation while he was a Tuskegee Airman, like in World War II, and I don't know well, at this point, I'm working on a third novel that takes place in 1977 that has Charlie Margaret and their kids who are now grown, who'll be in their 20s. So it wouldn't be that one, but I do think there are questions right now about whether or not it would be appropriate for me to write a book with a Black male lead. And I don't know if I agree with those criticisms. I understand the criticisms, but I don't know if I agree with them. But like, that would be something I would like to write someday. And it's not the time anyway, because I'm working on this third book, but I don't know. I feel like in terms of representation, there's a lot of issues being voiced and discussed and sussed out in the public square. And at some point, if that ever lands in a place where like I feel like I could do this, then I would like to do it. And if not, then maybe that's a season of the Hellfire Club TV show that we give to writers of color and directors of color and executive producers of color. I don't know, but I do love the character Isaiah Street, who my brother came up with the name of, and I would love to do more with him if I could.
Cool.
We have
that's great. We have a minute and 20 seconds. Maybe we should wrap up here. What I wanted to ask you next was about history and research and your collecting. So I'll just ask you this, since you are a student of history and not just of collecting facts through your research, but the actual objet. You have this, a complete set of US presidents, little statues in your office. And I just wondered, what is that about, if you could answer in a minute?
So it's not complete because the company stopped making them during Nixon. It's this, it's a toy company that doesn't exist anymore. I think it was called Marx Toys, M-A-R-X. And it's really actually kind of fun but they made these little statues of every US president, and you would order them and then you would paint them. You would do the actual painting of them.
Oh.
And when I found out about this, I got the set. And then there's this weird, I mean, this is very niche, but like there is a world of people who take some of these characters and then remake them to like make for all the presidents since Nixon, to make so it's a complete ongoing set by just painting them differently. Like I don't know what they do, like Andrew Jackson becomes Bill Clinton. I have no idea what it is, but it's really interesting. It's this very small little world that is familiar with these toys. But that's what it is. And I've offered my kids $100 if you can just put them in order. That's all. $100 if you just learn how to do it in order. And they have no interest in that. They have no interest. I don't even know if I could do it at this point. But a few years ago, I could have.
Well, Jake, on that note, I think we're out of time. It's been great to chat with you. I look forward to seeing you in person soon. Should we throw it back to the hosts here?
Before we go, thank you so much for doing this, man. I really appreciate it. Beth Ann asked me who would I want to do this, and you, of course, were foremost, and so I'm really grateful. I'm grateful for your friendship, most importantly. Thank you so much for doing this, and thanks, Beth Ann, Patrick, and the 1455 Summerfest for having us, and best of luck to everybody out there. And remember, the number one lesson of writing is writers write. Sit down and write. Writers write. Write. That's what you need to do. Have a great summer day, everybody.
Okay, take care.